What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and it's time to show our projected records for the SEC for the upcoming 2022 college football season. So a lot of these teams we did videos for, or I did a schedule preview and a projected record and kind of broke it all down. I didn't do as many teams as I normally do this year. It's just been kind of a crazy last few months for me. Next year, I'm going to get back to it. I'm going to jump on this in January. We're going to get hopefully at least all the Power 5 teams to where they'll have their own video and everything. But I did at least want to show you the projections for all the Power 5 teams, and that's what we're going to do by showing you the conference. So the teams that I didn't do videos on, you're going to get to see their projected records here in this video. Keep in mind, this is not an official prediction. Our prediction could look a lot different than this. I mean, this is simply an average based off of how tough each team's schedule is and kind of how good we expect each team to be, but it is not an official prediction. It's simply a projection just to kind of give you an idea of how good each team is going to be and what each team's record could be, around where they should be in 2022. Here were the projections from 2021 for the SEC West. You can see the projected record, and then on the right, the actual record. And every team in the SEC West was within 2 games. Our projections from last year, all within 2 games. Some of my predictions were a little bit better than the projections. Some of them might have been worse, but Alabama was projected to go 11-1. They did go 11-1. Texas A&M was projected to go 9-3. You have to wonder if Haynes King had not gotten injured, could this team maybe at least have gotten to 9-3, but they were 8-4. LSU was projected to go 8-4. They underperformed 6-6. They also had a lot of injuries, so again, a healthy team, maybe they get to 8-4. Ole Miss really had a great year. They were 10-2, and they were only projected to go 8-4. So a really strong year for the Rebels. They were a bit of a surprise last season. I thought they had it in them. I thought this team had potential to be a top 10 team. I think I predicted them to go 9-3 or 10-2. I can't remember for sure. Auburn, they were 6-6. Their projection was 7-5. I do know that I did pick them to go 6-6. Arkansas projected to go 6-6. They were 8-4, so they were better than their projection. Mississippi State 6-6. They were actually 7-5. So all of these within 2 games. Biggest overperformer would have been Ole Miss, and Arkansas. Ole Miss and Arkansas better than expected. And then LSU was the one team that was 2 games under where they were expected to be. So let's take a look at the projected standings here in the SEC West. Now keep in mind, we're going to show you an overall record and a conference record, but all of our projections are done based off of the full 12 games. I just kind of gave a rough estimate of what the conference records could potentially be, and I maybe moved some up and down to where we got the wins and losses all the same in the SEC. It's a total, I think, of 56 games. 56 wins, 56 losses. And so keep in mind that don't read too much into the conference records. This is really to get the overall record. And it could even add up to where, we could have 2 teams from different conferences that both wind up going undefeated in the non-conference based on the projection, even though that obviously couldn't happen, but it's simply how the math has to work. So we're just really focusing here on the overall record. So let's start at the bottom. Mississippi State going 6-6 overall, just 2-6 in the SEC. Again, that they could be 6-6, and maybe they lose a non-conference game, which I don't think they play anyone that should beat them. But I was surprised, honestly, that Mississippi State was down at 6-6. They do have to play Georgia and Kentucky, maybe the top 2 teams out of the East. So I don't think Mississippi State is the worst team in this division. But because of their schedule, they might wind up at the bottom. It'll be interesting to see. We had Auburn just ahead of them. They were also projected to go 6-6. It did work out for them to go 3-5, meaning they would lose a non-conference game to Penn State. But let's say they beat Penn State, and then maybe they go 2-6. Then they'd be tied with Mississippi State at 6-6 overall. So that's why I say focus on the overall record. But Auburn and Mississippi State down here at the bottom, and just ahead of Auburn. And we had... This is really kind of how I think the West is going to go. I think Alabama is going to be kind of clearly above everyone else. I know some people disagree with not only Alabama, but maybe some of the other teams that they think that maybe they can challenge Alabama. I don't see it happening. But again, these projections I think do reflect close to what I think the standings will look like. Maybe not exactly, but we had a kind of a logjam here with these next few teams. LSU also projected to go 7-5, 4-4, so 500 in the SEC, 7-5 overall. And again, we got some ties here. Arkansas 7-5, 4-4 in the conference. So over the tiebreakers, again, we're looking at the overall record. That's how I determine the order here. If there was a tie, I really just went to who had home field advantage in the head-to-head matchup. So I believe Arkansas has home field advantage over LSU. But I mean, it's really a tie. We don't, there's really no separation there. Both teams 7-5, 4-4 in the conference. Arkansas has a tricky non-conference schedule, by the way. I don't know that they lose a non-conference game, but again, to make the projections work, they did have to. That's how it had to come out. So 7-5 for Arkansas, 7-5 for LSU. Then we move up to Ole Miss, who's actually projected to go 8-4. A lot of this does have to do with their schedule. They have a much more favorable schedule than Arkansas. Arkansas, like I said, has a tricky schedule. Ole Miss has a pretty good non-conference schedule. And of course, they get to play Vanderbilt out of the West, or out of the East, I should say. So yeah, Ole Miss sitting there at 8-4. Looks like another good year for them based off of these projections. Texas A&M projected to go 9-3. So Texas A&M just ahead of Ole Miss, 5-3 in the conference. They would be that number 2 team. So we'd have of course Alabama, who I'll show, and then we'll have Texas A&M. But a very close race in the SEC West if it plays out like this. 1 or 2 games could definitely swing things as far as who's going to be number 2, 3, 4 in this division. But Alabama is projected to win the conference by 2 games. They are projected to go 11-1, 7-1 in the conference. I'll go ahead and give you a spoiler for my predictions. I don't have Alabama losing a regular season game. I don't see anyone beating them. There are some tricky games on the schedule, though. I mean, even Texas, you never know. The SEC West can be really good. So I think the odds would tell you that, yes, Alabama is probably going to trip up somewhere, but it's still a good chance they go undefeated. 11-1 the projection for them. If we look back to last year, every game in the West, every team was within 2 games. So, you could look at that and say best case scenario for Texas A&M is 11-1, worst is 7-5. Ole Miss 10-2, 6-6. You could kind of go down through the list, and I think that would be. I don't think any team here is going to be. I don't think the record's going to be more than 2 games different. I don't really see. Alabama's obviously not going to go 9-3. Texas A&M's not going to do worse than 7-5, and they're not going to go 12-0. Ole Miss, I don't think it's going to go worse than 6-6. Not going to be better than 10-2. Arkansas and LSU are interesting. If a team is going to beat this, I think you could see Arkansas or LSU maybe go 10-2 and be 3 games better than the projection. But I don't know. That's going to be tough with their schedules. And then Auburn and Mississippi State there at 6-6. Maybe one of them could get to 8-4. But again, we're playing the averages here, and this is the projection for the SEC West. Alabama on top, and then a very close race after that. Give me your thoughts here on the SEC West down in the comments below. Here were the 2021 projections for the SEC East, and you can see, for the most part, they were pretty accurate, similar to the SEC West. Almost everyone was within a game or 2. Florida, the one team that the projection really missed the mark on. Of course, they just kind of fell apart last year. But Georgia was projected to go 11-1, 12-0. And really, Georgia was like projected to go 11.5 and 0.5 because the Clemson game was a 50-50 game in the preseason. So if we had said that they were going to win that game, then the projection would have been 12-0. Florida, again, this was a team that they really underperformed. They were the biggest underperformer in the SEC last season, going just 6-6. Kentucky beat the projection by 2 games. They were projected to go 7-5. They go 9-3. Good year for them. Missouri off the mark by 1. They were just 6-6. Tennessee beat the projection by 2. Projected just to go 5-7. They went 7-5. South Carolina beat it by 1 game, going 6-6 and making it to a bowl game despite a tough schedule. And then Vanderbilt going 2-10, even worse than the 4-8 projection for them. So now let's look ahead to 2022. And again, we're really going to focus on the overall record here, not as much on the conference record because we had to move that conference record around just to get an even number of wins and losses for the conference records. Just focus on that overall record. So at the bottom, we've got Vanderbilt going 2-10. So they did not get the same projection. And I think a big reason why they were projected to go 4-8 last year and 2-10 this year is because the SEC is just better. I mean, South Carolina is just better. Tennessee is better, or at least than they were projected to be last season. And so that really gives Vanderbilt no game where you really say they got a shot. Last year you looked at Missouri and South Carolina and Tennessee and you thought, well, maybe Vanderbilt has a little bit of a chance, probably not going to win, but it would have given them enough of a percentage to where if you add all those up, you could get a win potentially. But they have basically no chance in any game they play this year. I think Missouri is the most likely game that they could possibly win. But a 2-10 overall projection for them. Moving on to Missouri, they are projected to go 6-6. That would put them around 3-5 in the conference. I have a hard time seeing this team going 3-5. Maybe we'll see. I think you could probably put them more in like a 2-6 range, and then if they win their non-conference games, they could go 6-6. I believe they play Kansas State. I'm trying to remember the schedules. I think that's their non-conference game. But again, we're really looking at that overall record, 6-6 for Missouri, enough to get to a bowl game, which would put 13 of the 14 teams, if these projections did come true, 13 of the 14 teams in the SEC would make it to a bowl game, which would really be something. Ahead of them, Florida, projected to go 7-5. Now we've got some ties here. We're looking at the overall record. That's the order that I went in. But if we did have a tie, I went with whoever had home field advantage in the regular season matchup to kind of put one team ahead of the other. But really, it's just a tie. Florida at 4-4. Also, South Carolina at 4-4, 7-5 overall. I think that's pretty accurate. I think the SEC East projections here are going to be pretty accurate, and they may not be perfect, but I definitely think they'll all be within a game or two, just like they were last year, except for Florida. But I don't see a Florida happening this year in the SEC East. Then we've got Kentucky, also 4-4 in the conference, but 8-4 overall, so ahead of South Carolina and Florida because of that overall record. They have played. All these teams are going to play a tough schedule in the SEC. But an easier non-conference schedule maybe for Kentucky. That's going to put them at 8-4, ahead of South Carolina and ahead of Florida. And then you've got Tennessee up here at number 2. Same overall projection as Kentucky at 8-4. But just the way it had to work out, this does have them at 5-3, meaning they would lose to Pitt. But let's say they beat Pitt. That would change that conference record to 4-4. And they'd be right there with Kentucky and South Carolina and Florida. So while you see Tennessee and Kentucky at just ahead of South Carolina and Florida, when you look at those projections, I think those 4 teams are pretty even. And I think it's going to be a really interesting race there in the East. But based off of how it worked out, conference record-wise, yes, Tennessee did finish ahead of Kentucky and South Carolina and Florida here. But they were tied with Kentucky with that 8-4 overall record. And then there's Georgia at 11-1 overall, 7-1 in the conference, same as Alabama. Who's going to beat them? That's the question. They've got some tricky games in there. Maybe someone knocks them off. But I think, it's 11-1 or 12-0 for Georgia. Don't see them doing any worse than that. So when you look at this, if everything is within 2 games, like 13 to 14 teams were last year, you could say Tennessee maybe 10-2, Kentucky maybe 10-2 if things really go their way. But also maybe as bad as 6-6 potentially. Could South Carolina or Florida get to 9-3? Or could they finish even worse? Maybe a 6-6 or 5-7 record potentially. Missouri, if things go off the rails there, could they be 4-8? So you just kind of look at the best and worst case scenarios there, going up and down a couple of games. But overall, I think this is pretty accurate. I do think Georgia will be right there at the top, and then you'll have kind of a logjam with those next 4 teams. This is not an official prediction. This is simply a projection based off of these percentages that we've been using. My predictions will be coming up here very soon, and they won't look exactly like this, but like I said, I think this gives a pretty good indication of what the SEC East is going to look like in 2022. Would love to get your thoughts on this. How do you think that the projections look here? Do you agree or disagree with this? Give me your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more.